remember the questions by any chance, Constance? Or Gary? Or Mokgaitse?
I think the one was definitely sort of, are we, what's our pedagogical sort of approach? Is it more, was it learning centered or student centered? I can't remember what the second question was, but I know that was definitely the first one.
Or teacher centered.
Yeah, I was trying to sort of figure out which one I am. I suppose more student centered in that. I suppose for me, it's the concern is always more, are the students engaged? How are they engaging with the content? And through that, the learning will happen. That's sort of my I suppose, my approach to things. That's how I sort of view it and understand it.
I've kind of until this conference really always viewed these as two mutually exclusive positions, approaches. They they live well together. So if you teacher centered, you can still focus on the process of learning. It's just kind of I was thinking earlier now to phrase it, but I kind of look at control as let's say you've got in a room you've got 100% control available, and so if the facilitator takes 20% control of the classroom, then the students have got 80% of the classroom. So the more the facilitator takes control, the less control has the students have. So it's that kind of a sliding scale almost between student control and teacher control. So I've heard some people kind of trying to inject themselves into the process of learning, into that discourse as participants. So what you have then is if in that learning centered conversation you have lots of teacher control, then you kind of you kind of move away from the student centeredness. You're still learning centered. You're not student centered. You're more teacher centered. And the more control students have over the learning experience, you kind of move to a student centeredness combined with learning centered. This is kind of how I'm trying to make sense of this. And so I'm not a big fan of teacher centeredness, because I think it's a power imbalance if you take control. So you can't really be all that student centered if the teacher is just getting up in class and talking for 30 minutes.
Yeah, agreed.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, that's how I also sort of understood it.
I probably am a little bit now more confused because I think I'm one of those people who have used the terms more interchangeably, looking at how student-centeredness, in my view, enhances learning. So in being student-centered, thought being learning was my purpose, knowing the students well enough, know where they are coming, so that I will be able to facilitate the task. I find the separation a little bit confusing for me, but we are here to learn and happy to learn.
Yeah, so I'm really up until today, I was kind of really very anti the way in which learning centeredness often manifests itself, because you often get teachers who move into the learning centered space, focusing on the process of learning, not necessarily on the student's agency, but how would students learn? But the teacher controls that discourse, and so that power differential kind of makes that students don't participate as well as they could. have there been less teacher control. So in my view, in my most recent view, I like the idea that you combine, or that you take a student-centered approach to learning-centeredness, as opposed to a teacher-centered approach to learning-centeredness. Because I don't like the idea that the teacher becomes an active participant in the learning process where they co-construct knowledge. So in a social constructivist conversation, you have a teacher, and the teacher is kind of co-constructing understandings, and what the power differential then does is it diminishes the social kind of interchange, because you're the knower in the room, so students will not easily disagree with you, and then so the construct that you come up with will be leaner than it could be. I think simply because students will maybe not participate as fervently in that knowledge construction process. It's a thought. It's not a fact. It's I think that's what would happen, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that thought. If we are looking at learning centeredness as heavily invested in the teacher, that their facilitation is now probably in control, rather than a situation where it's the understanding of, who is my student, how do I present what I have for them to get a meaningful engagement from the teaching learning process. But it's very complex.
Also, if you listen to instructionists will very readily tell you that the most effective way for people to learn, and I guess within the context of a fixed body of knowledge that needs to be mastered, the most effective way to do that is direct instruction as opposed to discovery learning. But the problem with that position is that if you want to use Bloom's taxonomy as a reference, the higher order thinking can't be instructed. You have to. That's the higher order thinking processes are thinking processes. So you can't teach somebody how to do an analysis. You can show them a method, but every analysis is different, and so the student needs to kind of figure out how to do the analysis. So direct instruction works on the entry into a new knowledge domain. So Gary, so if you teach accounting, teaching people debits and credits and what the meaning of the word asset is, and the accounting equation, that works best especially if you've got limited time, if you just teach your students that rather than trying to let them discover their own accounting process. But when it comes to, sorry, I'm using accounting as a reference because that's my initial discipline. But so when you get to disclosure, and you've got to adhere to standards, but there's different ways in which you can adhere to the standards given the specific set of financials that you're reporting on. That's not so easily instructed. People need to kind of get into what you're trying to achieve and what the standard requires, and how to apply the standard to the specific situation. And so there, you need to get far more, or you need to get kind of more into constructivist kind of learning rather than instructivist learning. So to have teacher-centeredness kind of juxtaposed to learning-centeredness, juxtaposed to student-centeredness, I think is perhaps not the best way to go about that, as opposed to seeing these as kind of all finding a a useful space and a complementary space, where it's appropriate.
Yeah, I suppose not to see it as sort of, I guess, sort of binary or ordinal,
Yeah.
where,
Yeah.
it's a sort of a bit,
One or the other.
Yeah, it's not one or the other. You can sort of interchange when it's it's knowing probably when it's appropriate. Like you said now, I mean, in accountancy, there's moments where it is appropriate to go instruction based, and sometimes, and it's often not. You've just got to